Experts are warning to not buy off the plan. Let's have a look. Good morning, everyone. I'm Florian Heise, and welcome to another episode of Heise Says. I've got my morning stein of coffee, and I'm ready to settle down for some work on Monday. But before I get into that, I thought we'd go through this article from ABC News, because it is very topical and very interesting. So, building experts commissioned to investigate the industry warn, I wouldn't buy a new apartment. So, the professionals, the experts, one half of the team that prepared the Shergold-Weir report, and I'll overlay that here. I've done a video series where I've read through the entire report. If you want to listen to it, be my guest. And it's a very good report. There's a lot of interesting things in there. There's a lot of things that should have been recommended. There's a lot of stuff that seems obvious to most people in the game, but probably isn't to the average punter. Let's have a look through this article. But before we do, would anyone watching this, actually consider buying off the plan? Let me know in the comments if you would. I could only think of one circumstance where maybe if you were a subby working on the project and you knew it in intimate detail, you were essentially your own clerk of works, then maybe. But then again, here's the thing. Have you ever taken on a job from someone else? Have you ever taken on a project from someone else? Because the problem is, then you're taking on all their responsibilities. So often when you take on a project from someone else, you need to charge a premium to go over and check all the crap they've done, or you need to throw out their work and redo it. People don't like it when they realize they've wasted some money. But that's what everyone is doing when they're buying these things, these apartments off the plan. They're taking on all that risk and responsibility from it. I guess if you haven't worked in that type of environment where you're taking over someone else's project or work, you may not instantly realize that. But no, I'm happy with my falling down house. So let's have a look. The co-author of a landmark report on how to fix Australia's building industry has declared she would not buy a newly built apartment given the scale of the problems. Yeah, I can't imagine anyone other than my, de facto clerk of works would. If I was going to be investing in an apartment, I'd buy an older one. It's common sense, isn't it? It's just logical. Bronwyn Weir told a Four Corners investigation into Australia's building industry. I wouldn't buy a newly built apartment. No. Miss Weir and former senior public servant Peter Shergold co-wrote the Building Confidence Report commissioned by the Australia's federal, state and territory building ministers. Well, there you go. It's a big issue. The report, delivered in February last year, made 24 recommendations, including a crackdown on private certification of buildings and registration of every person involved in the building process. At a meeting in July, building ministers committed to implementing the reforms, but Miss Weir told Four Corners that would not fix the legacy of decades of inaction. Yeah, that's the problem. That is the problem. And you can't just implement this now and then boom, it'll all be fixed. There's a legacy of buildings around the state, around the country, frankly, that have got issues. And implementing these things might help future generations. I remember it was like when I was at university and they changed the architectural course at QT like twice while I was there. Fundamentally changed the whole course. And we were frustrated because we felt like the guinea pigs. They changed something here, changed it there. And it was quite annoying, actually, now that I think back about it. It's the same thing here. Any changes that they implement won't come into action or won't have an effect for all the older stock that's already been built. And the stuff that's still under construction now, it'll be years before the benefits flow through. The existing building stock is what it is. We have hundreds of thousands of apartments that have been built across the country over the last 2 decades. Or 2 to 3 decades, she said. Yes, and there is significant issues everywhere because that sector has tremendously overheated. Just looking at I'll bring up a great quote here from Matt Barry about 64% of Australia's GDP growth came from cities of Sydney and Melbourne in 2016, and 24% of that was from just a corridor in Sydney, from Sydney CBD to Macquarie Park. Okay, this is also aligns in the time when a significant amount of foreign investment was used to stimulate that sector. So guys, have a look at his report. He wrote a great report, I think, House of Cards, or where the Australian economy, just the situation that we're in. Well, not really a report, more an essay. I think the longest essay ever on LinkedIn. I would highly recommend you look it up. But yes, so it just shows you how overheated it was, how much more there's going to be. Probably the prevalence of non-compliance has been particularly bad. I would say in the last 15 to 20 years, it's gotten worse over that period. And that means there's a lot of existing building stock that has defects in it. The new reforms won't improve existing building stock, unfortunately, so there'll be legacy issues for some time, and I suspect there'll be legacy issues that we're not fully aware of yet. Yes. Sadly, yes. Beware of buying off the plan, Miss Weir warns. Miss Weir said, for those looking to buy an apartment, it was probably more prudent to opt for a building that may be, say, 5 years plus of age. I would even up it. I would even up it. I know when I was looking with my mother on the Gold Coast, we were focusing on a range of older buildings. So if we were looking at high rises, because we wanted to look at all the options, we were looking at stuff from the 80s, solid concrete, boring, and frankly quite ugly looking buildings. But you don't have the same risk as some of the newer things. We ended up getting a little brick veneer townhouse, which was, single story with one fire separating wall to a neighbor, a little yard, kind of essentially a small version of her house that she has. And it provides the advantage that any significant issues there could be reasonable to fix. Body corporate was low. Some of the body corporate fees in these places down the Gold Coast are just insane. Insane. Anyway, back to the article. Less rambling. So, you would like to think that if there are major issues with that building, that it started to show, she said. So I think if people are looking at investing, there are ways to do good due diligence. Buying off the plan is a really tricky proposition at the moment. Well, I mean, that's the thing. How can you do an inspection of the building when you buy off the plan? What clauses are in? The clauses can you put in place to protect yourself? And why would you take that extra risk to ensure you secure it because there's so much demand? There's an oversupply of stock coming online. There's so many apartments coming up everywhere. Population growth is not naturally increasing. Anyway, Miss Weir said high-profile cases, such as the evacuation of Opal Tower and Mascot Towers in Sydney, meant there's a lack of confidence in the building industry. I think lack of confidence is quite a nice way to put it. But she hoped some better builders would give people assurances it was safe to buy and try to salvage what has been a pretty damaging impact for the latest news stories. The problem is there's just going to be more and more and more of these issues, guys. There's just going to be more of these issues coming for the next 10, 20 years. It's not going to stop. I mean, how long since Mascot? 10 years. So building built today. Could be 10 years. Do they have clerk of works on site inspecting everything? Even if they're checking and double checking everything now, what if stuff gets missed? We saw yesterday in the Verve apartment building, all the concrete issues there. I mean, come on. Am I the only one? No, I'm not. I know I'm not. So, a recent study of apartment building defects in Australia by Deakin University and Griffith University found 97% of buildings examined in New South Wales had at least one defect in multiple areas. In Victoria, the figure was 74%, and in Queensland, it was 71%, sorry. Go Queenslander, yep, raise the Stein to Queensland. One of the study's authors, Deakin University, Nicole Johnson, told Four Corners previous calls for reform had gone largely unheeded. Of course they had. Because it was a boom time. Everyone was making money. Money. People have been jumping up and down about this for years and years and years, Dr. Johnson said. There's been lots of committees formed. There's been lots of task forces. There's been lots of consideration around these, but nothing's really has happened. Yep, it's all just bloody talk. I mean, that's my frustration with the profession. Frankly, the risk and liability as an architect I will take on for a project compared to the reward, it doesn't stack up. Frankly, financially, it does not stack up. once you start, for me, it was actually starting to play in cryptos, to do some crypto trading and learning about the risk ratios and profit loss that when you go into a trade. And I started applying that same mentality to my architectural work. And, oh, okay, I'm taking on the responsibility for all these sub-consultants. I'm taking on this many years of insurance I have to maintain. I'm taking on this risk. And there's all these unknowns because I'm not supervising the site. So it really, really makes you question the risk-reward ratio of what you're working on. So yeah, there's one for you. Crypto has led to some flow-on effects that I probably never expected, or Rachel didn't expect with me starting to play with it. So, back to the article. New South Wales missed opportunity to bring in stricter laws. One glaring example of inaction is how New South Wales failed to implement laws that could have addressed a major underlying reason for defective building work: dangerous or inferior products. In 2017, Queensland introduced new laws to police dangerous building products, also called non-conforming products, including flammable cladding that was responsible for the fire spreading in the UK's Grenfell Tower, an incident which killed 72 people. The laws, known as Chain of Responsibility laws, ensured every person who uses or supplies a product on a building can be held personally responsible if it fails. There you go. Later that year, New South Wales showed a draft bill of its own proposed laws to a meeting of building industry groups. What we saw was a draft bill that was the Queensland legislation but on steroids. It was better, Roger Hills, the Chief Executive Officer of the Building Products Industry Council, said. They had taken a lot of time to incorporate all the learnings and findings from the Queensland experience and wrapped it up into a piece of legislation that was robust, was easy to use, and it would have gotten the job done. Perhaps. The industry representative left that meeting very hopeful that this was something that was going to be useful and that it actually worked properly. The thing is, you've got to feel sorry for these manufacturers, because I've spoken to them several times in just my professional capacity. What you do is, as an architect, you specify a product. Say a aluminium composite cladding, and then you document it up. Your client signs off on it, then it goes to the builder. Builder comes in either a tender or later, particularly if it's design and construct, and we'll say, oh no, we're not going to use that one. We've got an equivalent product which is cheaper, and bring it in, and put it on the client. And in general, you want to draw upon the knowledge of the contractor, because they're over all these things. But the problem is, when they don't do the due diligence properly, or when the architect doesn't do the due diligence properly, or when the information provided is fraudulent, then you've got issues. And the manufacturer who's doing it all right loses out in the end. And then we get these issues where there's all these non-conforming products everywhere in buildings. So, when the bill entered the New South Wales Parliament, Mr. Hill said the industry was shocked to see it had been absolutely gutted. Well, there you go. I mean, that's the thing. The politicians and the bureaucrats, the public servants, will show one thing in front of you and then change it. We've done our public consultation. We counted up at about 80 clauses that have been pulled out of the document, he said. Those clauses were all around non-conforming building products. In fact, the definition of a non-conforming building product wasn't even in the bill. Well, that should be in an additional document that can be changed as required. But all of the clauses to do with chain of responsibility and duty of care were all taken out, as were all powers, the recall powers the minister had to recall defective products. Well, the government did not want to add more red tape. Four Corners has confirmed that New South Wales Cabinet rejected the proposed chain of responsibility law due to concerns it would impose more red tape on the building industry, potentially slowing it down. There you go. There's the issue. Because it would. It would cause more red tape. It would. It'd be painful, but you deal with it. It depends. See, this is the problem. This is the problem that we have. We're at a challenging point now in our civilization where the complexity of these buildings is so advanced that the buyer wouldn't have the capacity to actually confirm everything was done properly. Even hiring professionals to go through it, it's a challenging situation. Do we open up the market to allow it to adjust, Or do we impose regulation to try and mitigate this risk? That's the question. And that's the challenge, because we're in some half-assed version in between now, aren't we? So New South Wales Minister for Innovation, Kevin Anderson, would not comment on cabinet deliberations, but said the New South Wales government is currently implementing the largest reform to the building and construction industry in the history of the state. As part of those reforms, the government is considering a raft of measures that will improve the transparency, accountability, and quality of work within the sector, he said. Mr. Anderson said the current situation is a collective making of industry and the need for more modernised legislation. I mean, that's the thing. Chain of custody, responsibility laws. Surely with our advanced technology, there are ways to check these things better. The property industry disputes that there is a crisis, but is backing calls for state government to implement the recommendations of the Shergoldby report. The chief executive of the Property Council of Australia, Ken Morrison, told Four Corners the overwhelming majority of people in the industry are doing the right thing, and in fact, there's great projects right across our cities. I think that statistics on building defects point to the fact that when you're doing something very complicated like building a high-rise building, there's going to be things which need to get fixed up, he said. Well, yeah, he's right there. He's right there. I mean, it's a bit of dramatization saying there's so many buildings have defects. Every building will have a defect. That's why you have a defect liability period to address those defects. Now, the issue is when, during that liability period, if there's conflict of interest with the body corporate or the strata, and for some reason they don't want to implement the requirements there to get the contractor back or the developer back, that's the big issue. That's another issue as well. So, asked if he would buy an apartment, Mr. Morrison replied, I would, absolutely. I think I would be a discerning buyer looking for quality, but absolutely I would. Okay. Well, that's a great summary of the investigation by Four Corners. And I'll have to watch it on iView, because I haven't had a television aerial plugged in for nearly a decade, guys. So, what do you think? What do you think? Do you think it's all too late? Would you buy an apartment? Yeah. For me, it comes down to the fact that I don't know if I'd want to live in one. I don't think I could share. I'd rather have a crummier house than an apartment. And yeah, that's just the way I personally am. And now we've got so many kids, I don't think we could even fit in an apartment anymore. We'd be a fire hazard with all our timber bunk beds. We'd have to cram in there. Anyway, guys, thanks for joining me today. Like, share, and subscribe. And I'll see you all again later. Have a good day. See ya.